Hello everyone, good afternoon. On this occasion, we will be presenting about our midterm topics. Our topics is called English for Presentations. So this is our group. We are all from class 11, starting from me. My name is Bagus, Ananda Nosa Putraditya with student ID 23 1509 1041 and my colleagues.
My name is Putu Rajendra Pradiptayudha and my student number is 231 509 1057.
And my name is Gusti Ngurah Agung Yogananta Pramana. My student number is 231 509 1065.
The first part of our presentation is called What Makes a Good Presentation. So on the book, there will be different parts and we divided it into two sections. The first section is what is introduced in the book, and the second section is the other examples that we found from other sources. So the first part is called What Makes a Good Presentation. There are multiple checklists from the book. The first one is Remember Your Audience. What that is meet audience expectations with relevant content, organize the information, design an overall structure which is clear to the audience, use visuals effectively, use clear and simple messages, communicate with body language, remain confident and be positive, deliver your message, use your voice effectively, and lastly, prepare thoroughly. Practice before the real thing. So that is all the checklists from the books, and this is the classic presentation flow or organization. So the first, starting from the greeting, introducing ourselves, introducing the presentation, what the presentation is all about, explaining the structure of the presentation, presenting the main body, concluding, summarize, and lastly taking questions from the audience. Now, from what we've got from other sources, remembering your audience is basically considering the level of knowledge that your audience has on the topic. Organizing information is summarizing key points at the end to reinforce your message. Use visuals effectively, so great presenters basically usually use photos, video, and images more often. Communicate with body language, stand confidently, and use open gestures. Deliver your message, vary the pace, pitch, and volume of your voice, and prepare thoroughly, so great presenters rehearse before the real thing. The next part is starting. So some of the key language for introductions that are present in the book is greeting, for example, good morning, afternoon, or evening, everyone. Name and position. So let me just start by introducing myself. My name is Peter Wong. The title or the subject of the presentation. Today I'd like to speak about blah blah blah. Objective. The objective of the presentation is to present blah blah blah. Main parts or outline. I've split my talk into 4 main parts. First, and then visuals. I will be using the whiteboard and flip chart. The length of the presentation. The presentation will take about something minutes. Questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to interrupt. The audience, or acknowledging the audience. It's nice to see many faces. And link to start. Alright, we can begin by looking at something. So that is what present in the book and what we found on other sources. Starting from greeting, for example, it is a pleasure to be here today. Name and position, for example, I'm Ocha and I work as a developer in my own company, Ocha Studio, for example. The title or the subject, in my presentation, I'll focus on why a proper art direction is crucial in game development, for example. Objective, by the end of this presentation, you will be able to understand art direction even better. The main parts or outline, I will begin by introduction, then move on to the main point, and lastly, I'll conclude this presentation, for example. Visuals, let's have a look at these images that I've created, for example. Length of the presentation, it will take about 30 minutes. Questions, I'd like to leave questions until the end of my talk. Audience, I hope this presentation will be informative for all of you. And link to start. Without further ado, let's get started. So that's the second part of the topic. Now the third part is about signaling or linking the different parts of the presentation. So in the book, sequencing ideas, For example, like first, second, third, then, next, and finally. Ending a section, I think that covers everything on something. Intermediate questions. Are there any questions or comments on that? Opening a new section, let's now look at something. Exploring a list of points in relation to something. Adding ideas in addition to this or moreover. Digressing. If I could just digress for a second, something, and going back. Let me now return to something. That's from the book and not from other references. Sequencing ideas you can use to begin with, or next, or lastly in the last part, and then ending a section. In short, art direction is really important. Intermediate questions. Do you have any questions so far? Opening a new section. I would now like to address the main point. Exploring a list of points. Let's examine the following points. Adding ideas. Furthermore, art direction affects our game. Digressing. To provide some context, let me explain about what other studio does. Going back, let's revisit about the introduction earlier. So those are some of the examples that we found from other sources. The next part, the fourth part, is about highlighting and emphasizing. From the book, there are focusing. For example, I'd like to emphasize on something. What I'd like to do is something. Repetition. This is a very, very difficult problem. Simplifying, basically, or to put it simply. Analyzing. Let's look at this more closely. Articulation on stressing. I agree, it is important. Dramatic language, a total or absolute or complete disaster. Contrast. Yesterday it was easy. Today it is far more difficult. And from other references, focusing is, I'd like to draw your attention to the next part. What I'm trying to say is that art direction is crucial. Repetition. Game development is really, really expensive. Simplifying. In essence, art in video games is crucial. Analyzing. Let's analyze this part further. Articulation on stressing. It does seem to be challenging. Dramatic language. It is truly a game changer. Contrast. On the other hand, indie games can be much cheaper than AAA games. That's for example. And the fifth part is engaging your audience from the book, starting from rhetorical questions. Is this company growing fast enough? Offer clarification. Is that clear? Directing questions. How many people here have ever? Creating rapport. We need to something. Interesting facts. Did you know that something? Interesting examples. For example, something. Acknowledge. I realize you all know something. And lastly, diplomacy on softening. I tend to think that something. So that's from the book. And now from the other sources that we found. Rhetorical questions can be like, what if we could simplify game development? Offer clarification. Let me explain further about my previous statement. Directing questions. Can you think of any examples of failed video games? Creating rapport. I can relate to that feeling of burden when doing art for video games. Interesting facts. It's fascinating to note that recently a lot of indie games do better than AAA games. Interesting examples. Let me give you an example for this case. Acknowledge. I'm confident you all have the essential skills. And lastly, diplomacy on softening. I may be wrong, but this doesn't look good. So that's my part. And the next one will be explained by my colleague. So go ahead, please.
Okay, the next part is visual aids, design and type. Visual aids are material like image, chart, used to enhance an understanding. The first is introducing the visual. We can say like this. Okay, let's take a look at blah 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 blah. The next one is check with the audience. We can say it like this. Is that clear for everyone? The next one is meaning of the visual. We can say it like this. This is a graph or a diagram which shows a blah 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 blah. The next one is focusing on the attention. We can say it like this. I'd like to draw your attention to blah blah blah. Next one is type of visual. There are a few type of visual we can use, which is land grab, flowchart, table, and etc. The next one is equipment and environment. Here are some few tools we can use to display a visual aids. For example, a board, select projector, video player, and etc. Next slide. Okay, this is for the other expression, introducing the visual. Here are visual representation of the data. The next one is check with the audience. Any question on this visual? Next, meaning of the visual. This is a bar chart that illustrate the growth in sales over the last year. The next one is focusing on attention. Let's zoom in on this part of the table. Next slide. Okay, the next one is visual aid, describing chart. As we can see here, there is a up and rocket chart. We can describe it like this: to go up, to increase, a rise, an improvement. Okay, the next chart we can see it like this. We can see here, which is down and slump chart. We can describe it like this: to go down, to decrease, a fall, a worsening. Okay, the next chart, which is peak and fluctuate, we can say it like this: to fluctuate, to bottom out, a low. Okay, the next one is speed of change. When the chart look like a up chart, we can say it like this: there was a rapid rise in the sales. The next one is degree of change. When the chart is looking like a rocket chart, we can say it like this: there was a dramatic rise in the sales. Next one is when the chart looking the next one is preposition. When the chart looking like the last chart, we can say it like this: there was an increase of 4 million over the last year. Next is giving explanation. When we want to giving the explanation about the result, we can say it like this: there is this result. This will result in blah 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 blah. This happened because blah 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 blah. Next. The next one is describing changes from the other expression. There has been a sharp increase in the revenue. There was a sharp drop in the number of visitors last month. The chart fluctuates between high and low values, reaching a peak before stabilizing. Speed of change. The number of subscribers increased quickly after the campaign. Degree of change. We can observe a massive increase in customer engagement this month. Next slide. The next one is prepositions. We saw a decline of 5 million units in production over past year. Giving explanation. This trend result from a change in government policy. Next. Okay, the next one is body language being persuasive. Here are some few persuading language example. The first, proposing. We can say like this: I suggest that we blah 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 blah. Advantages. This is far superior to blah 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 blah. Star option. We have no choice. Blah 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 blah. Neutral versus emotive word. For neutral, we can say it like this: it's risky. Blah blah blah. Emotive. This will lead to chaos. Blah 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 blah. Say 3 times. This product is faster, cheaper, and more efficient. Next. Proposing. Why don't we consider blah blah blah? Advantages. This offer a significant improvement over blah blah blah. Stark option. The consequence of inaction will be dire blah blah blah. Neutral versus emotive word. This might not be the safest option blah blah blah. We cannot afford to overlook this blah blah blah. Say 3 times. This plan is effective, sustainable, and innovative. Blah blah blah. Next. The next one is communicating style. Every people must be having a different communicating style. Understand how you communicate is important to improve your presentation planning. The first, you have to choose between formality and informality. For example, formal phrases, we can say, "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen." The informality, we can say, "Hello, everyone." Next one is balance personal against impersonal. Impersonal. This will be looked later. Personal. I will look at this later. The next one is balance stating against questioning. Stating. Is that clear that blah 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 blah? Questioning. Would you agree that blah 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 blah? The next one is balance empathic against relax. Empathic. This is a really big problem. Relax. This is a slight worry. Next. Formality. I would like to take this opportunity to blah blah blah. Informality. Let me quickly run through this blah 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 blah. Balance personal against impersonal. Personal. This result will be discussed in the next meeting. Impersonal. I made a decision with the team. Balance stating against questioning. Stating. It's obvious that this will work. Questioning. Do you think this approach will work? Next. Balance empathic against relax. Empathic. This is absolutely critical for our success. Relax. This is important, but not a huge concern right now. Next slide. Okay, the next is closing presentation. There are a few ways we can close the presentation. The first, signaling at the end. Okay, that brings me to the end of my presentation. Summarizing. Before I finish, let me just go over blah blah blah. Concluding. To conclude, I'd like to say that blah blah blah. Final recommendation. It seems to me then that we should blah 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 blah. Support. I've prepared a handout which I will pass around. Closing. Thank you for listening so attentively. Inviting question. I'd be glad to answer any question. Next. Signaling at the end. To wrap things up, let's move toward the closing. Summarizing. In short, here's what you need to remember, blah blah blah. Final recommendation. Finally, I'd like to leave you with this thought, blah blah blah. Support. Therefore, it's clear that we should consider blah blah blah. Closing. You can find more information in the document I'll pass out. Next. Inviting question. Feel free to ask any question or provide feedback. The next one will be presented by my friend Yuda.
Alright, so now it's my part. So there are multiple ways to handling question we got from positive response, check your answer, clarify, refer back, accept criticism, referring back the question, and then there's different types of avoiding, which is from wrong topic, wrong person, returning a question, and hedging. So next slide. So what are the examples of handling questions? So here's the example. From the positive response, we got thank you for asking that question, and then check your answer. Is that clear now, or can we move on? Clarify. Could you repeat that for me, please? Refer back. Yes, I mentioned it in the introduction. Accept criticism. Up to a point, I agree. Referring back the question, I think we've already made it clear that. And then for the avoiding part, for the wrong person, I'm afraid I can't really answer that. For the wrong topic, I'd be glad to discuss that with your personally after the presentation. Returning a question, well, let me ask you the same question. And then hedging, well, that depends on what you mean by blah blah blah. Next one is the other responses. For positive response is this is excellent question, and then check your answer. Is the answer acceptable? Clarify. Could you please explain about your question on more detail? Refer back. Going back to what I explained before, blah 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 blah. Accept criticism. That's a good point. Referring back the question, as I mentioned before, and then for the avoiding part, wrong person, that's not really my expertise, I'm afraid. Wrong topic. I'm afraid that question is outside the scope of today's presentation. And then returning a question. Okay, just like your question, blah, blah, blah. Hedging. Well, it's pretty complicated. Alright, the next one is presenting at a glance. So there are three different parts of presenting at a glance. There are introduction, main body, and the ending. For the introduction, is starting from the greetings. For example, good morning, welcome to blah 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 blah, and then introduce yourself. My name is Yuda, for example, and then state the objective. The objective of my presentation today is blah blah blah, blah, and then outline the structure. I've divided the talk into 5 sections, and then the length. I will take 15 minutes, and then the questions. Feel free to interrupt. Link. Okay, to begin, I'd like to look at blah 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 blah, and then the next part is the main body. So we're starting from the part 1. So the first part of my presentation is blah 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 blah, and then the closing first part. So that's all I have to say on the first point. Any question on that? And then moving to the opening part 2. Okay, let's move on to the second section, which I have called. And then we move on to sequencing. There are 2 questions to look at here. Firstly, blah 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 blah, and then closing or moving on. Okay, that's everything on part 2. I will now move on to the part 3, highlighting. Here, I would like to highlight 2 items and then using visual. As you can see on this chart, recommending. I would suggest digressing. Could I digress for a second? Returning. Let me know to return to blah 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 blah, and then closing. Okay, that's all I wanted to say on part 3. And then the ending. Signal end. That brings me to the end of my presentation. Summarize it. To sum up, blah 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 blah. Conclude. In conclusion, I would like to say blah 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 blah. Invite questions. Are there any questions? Handle questions positively. That's a good question. Closing. If there are no more questions, I'll finish there. Right. Next one is the cross-cultural tips. There are different cultural tips, cross-cultural. So we start from involvement factor. There are interactions. Some audience simply want to listen and not contribute. And then role of silence. Some audiences use silence to communicate agreement, not hostility. And then interruptions. Some audiences expect to be able to interrupt. And then human touch. Some audience like to see personality of the presenter. Punctuality. Most audiences respect punctuality. And then formality. Some audiences see formality as lack of professionalism. Animation. Some audiences prefer a reverse style to over-enthusiastic presenter. Level of analysis. Many audiences have in-depth specialist knowledge. And then organization factor. We start from systematic. Some audiences prefer an organic style of theory structure. And then support. Some audiences don't want a lot visuals and handouts. Digestion. Some audiences see digression as irrelevant. And then next page. We got body language factor. There are hands. Some audience view hands in pocket as sloppiness. And then eye contact. Some audiences feel uncomfortable getting stared without eye contact. Dress. Some audiences work in companies and culture with strict dress code. And then body. Some audiences expect a presenter to be dynamic. Faces. Some audiences look for animated facial expression. And then we got the delivery factor. Language. Some audiences have a limited English vocabulary, or we can say it, language barrier. And then reading text, some audiences favor spontaneity over precision. And then voice, all audiences need sufficient volume and suitable speed. And then the social factor, there are names. Some audiences prefer family names to first names. Business card, some audiences will request a business card. Host thanking, all audiences expect basic courtesies to be polite. And then hierarchy, all audiences respect all social and corporate hierarchies. And then the last part, we got the golden rules, which is the do and don'ts, which is the important part on presentation. So first, we're going to move on to do. We got the do, so now we start from the do. All right, establish a clear objective. Talk about what your audiences expect you to talk about. Keep it simple, make it interesting, and have strong opening and closing. The other references are focus on your audience, eliminate nervous habit, use clear and concise language, conclude effectively, and use simple sentences. And now we're moving on the don'ts, which is the thing you don't do on presentation is talk for too long, speak too quickly, forget to summarize at the end, use distracting mannerism, tell irrelevant anecdotes or inappropriate jokes, and the other example are don't read or memorize your speech, don't turn your back on the audience, imitate someone's style, and keep your hands in your pockets. That's all from me.
Okay, so that was that was all the part of from the book on regarding English of our presentation. So this is some of the references that we use for each part of the topic. So these are all the references that we use, and that's it. Thank you.